can make the schools better. You know what? My kids, 3 of my kids went to Jacob Hyatt. They one in Dory now, one in Forest Grove. What I realized is the parents and the families can make the schools better. The more you're involved, the schools are a lot better off. Barbara Howard talked about the Jacob Hyatt playground. I helped build that playground because all my kids went there. It was a long process, but it was done. I built 3 other playgrounds. My family contributed to the Crystal Park playground. I built one at Main Street School. I built one at West Tappan. I coordinated those. We can do this one very easily. It doesn't take very much work to get one of these done. So it's important to have family involvement to get this done. Now when it comes about taxes, when I talk about taxes, the first thing, because like it was already said, we have a lot of people who barely afford to pay their rent, barely afford their mortgages now. We have to take everything into account. The first thing we have to do is look at, again, we're going to have the budget, what we can cut. We're going to have revenues. I'm not afraid to make a community decision at the time when it's needed. I've invested too much of my time to watch. I built 5 schools. I voted for 5 schools that to be done over in the city of Worcester. I voted for a police department investment, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars for the police department, make a better police department. I'm not letting that all fall apart. I am not going to let it all fall apart. Thank you.
All right, we got our next question. We're going to start with Joe. All right, I'm going to say the question real quick. Lots of residents raised concern about security in the Main South area, and they said they would prefer to have regular foot patrols in the neighborhood. Also, many residents raised concerns about racial profiling and being stopped by police based on their attire. Would you support a return to more community policing? How do you define community policing? What approach would you take to eliminate racial profiling?
All in 1 minute. That's a pretty impressive question. All right. A couple quick things. Number one, absolutely. You know, the key to public safety, at least in my neighborhood, is having police officers on the street who can work with the community to prevent crime. We have a good network of crime watch groups and neighborhood groups that are working closely with the police. There is a great challenge for the police to continue to support that. We do need more foot patrols. This summer, neighborhoods like mine, and neighborhoods across the city, when they lost that summer overtime money, or they were using to deploy folks at night, crime went way up. On the issue of racial profiling, I believe the answer to kind of address racial profiling is you need to have more officers who reflect the communities that they serve. The reality is that the city of Worcester, which read it, over the last number of years has done a much better job of recruiting officers from communities of color. But the problem is that those officers are low on the seniority list. So when cuts happen, we're talking about even more cuts now, those officers are the first to go. And I think that's why, for one of many reasons, it's really important to keep investing in our police department, investing in those officers, because you can't lose those officers, because they serve as a bridge. They serve as a bridge for white officers to be able to kind of better communicate and work with different communities of color. I think it's critical as a community that we've got to make investments and continue to support the efforts to hire more officers from community of color, and so we can kind of continue to kind of keep a good connection and relationship with our communities. So thank you.
Both Joe and McCullough had said very pertinent, probably stole some of what I was going to say. But those are real, very real discussions. But you know, another thing too, I think, is that that you have to show as a city council that you're going to make the police department accountable. And this is a part of the area where it needs to be accountable. I used to work primarily doing criminal defense, and I won an award. Some of the things I passed out was the Donald Daring Courageous Advocacy Award. It was based on a case that dealt with racial profiling, and I pushed that particular police department, not Worcester, to the mat on the issue, and despite getting threatened. So the issue is that, you know, we as the city council can do a lot of things to show the police chief that this is important, not just talking about it, but holding them accountable.
Thank you. I completely support community policing, and it goes back to the theory behind it. The theory is called broken windows theory. And what that says is that if you're in a community where people are living there and something happens, somebody abandons a vehicle there, and no one calls the police, and the police don't arrive to investigate this, what happens to that vehicle? After a few days, they start to vandalize it, then they set it on fire, and then that is a signal to the criminal element to come in and start dealing drugs and going crazy with crime. Community policing stops that type of activity. And I believe that that's something that we should definitely have here in the city of Worcester. And if we look to see how we can measure the performances of the police department in light of some of these budget cuts, then maybe what we could do is we could actually have a good community policing program that would work. And with the racial profiling, I'm a firm believer that if you have the police engaging the public, they're out there, they know who lives there, because it's the job of the police to be nosy. They're out there asking questions, but if they know somebody who lives there, and they can identify the people who are the workers, the people that go to school, it will help them communicate, and together we can stop the criminal element. Thank you.
Mary Keith.
Thank you. Community policing is an issue that we've worked long and hard on in the Piedmont area, and I'd have to say that it really doesn't exist. Right now, I have to say that I'm really disappointed. I think there's a problem between the police department and our community. And until we recognize that, we can't fix it. Arrests are not success. Arrests are not success. We need to be preventive, and the only way that can happen is if we have good relationships. If an officer comes to your crime watch group, it's not the same officer that's driving around your neighborhood, not getting out of the car, and just dealing with emergencies. We used to have a policy of park and walk. Every officer was mandated to get out of their car and walk for 1 hour on their beat. That doesn't happen anymore. So until we see some of those policies recommitted to within the police department, I mean from the chief on down, I'd have to say that we don't have community policing.
Thank you. We're going to try, there's several questions here. We talked about community policing before, but I'll tell you what community policing really is. My grandfather was a Worcester police officer. He had a beat. He knew kids, he knew parents, and he knew where everybody should be and where they shouldn't be. And that's really what community policing is about. It's knowing the community that you are working in and being part of it. So the other question that you're talking about is racial profiling or being stopped by police on their attire. In the Worcester Public Schools, we used to have a program for teachers called The World of Difference. And it was a program that educated teachers about prejudices that they didn't realize they had, and I think that that's something that we need to try to do within the police department too. It's a great program. I'd like to bring it back into the schools too, but again, it's money. We've got to find grant money because it's not in our own city budget, but we need to look for that. We can't make any more excuses. And as far as taking an approach to eliminate racial profiling, there's a bill in Congress, ERPA, Anti-Racial Profiling Act, that's in there right now, which will prohibit law enforcement from profiling, and it encourages building stronger relationships in the community. So you can see it's a wraparound approach.